Welcome to Between the Vines. My name is Kevin Martin. I'm here with Jennifer Phillips Russo and Andy Musa. Hopefully you got a text message last week, especially if you're one of our regional growers. We wanted to remind you that we are still around during harvest doing these updates. And we actually got a few questions back about what you guys wanted to hear about. So we're going to address some of those questions this week. And I think we have a couple other things to talk about as well. The first thing I wanted to discuss was we did have a question about in-person meetings. I think as everybody knows, because of COVID, we had virtual coffee pot meetings last year until August, and then we had sort of a brief period of some in-person meetings in August. And I think we should provide some context for that because there were two things happening. We typically don't have in-person meetings during harvest, of course, because you guys are busy. So we do want to discuss what our plan is going forward because in August there was not a lot of COVID around. So we want to put that in context of, are we not having meetings right now because of harvest or because of COVID, and what can you expect for 2022? Jen, do you have anything you want to add to that question? I sort of addressed what we've done so far, but
yes, sure. Thank you, Kevin. Hi, everybody. So yes, we were having in-person meetings because they were outside and we were allowed to social distance. We are also having an in-person meeting that is limited to a small number inside coming up in November. The first 2 weeks of November, and it's on our website, lergp.cce.cornell.edu, for those of you not out in video land. It's called the My Efficient Vineyard tool. So I know we've talked a lot about it. We've had guest speakers such as Terry Bates and Nick Gunner come in and talk to us during Coffee Pots about this tool. And some people have expressed wanting to learn more about it. So we're going to have a little in-person class for you to come in, sit down. We can bring your cell phones, walk you through how to set it up, how to set your farm up. That will be the first day, the first week of November. And then the second week of November, we're going to have that same group hopefully come back for a practicum where we're going to go out in our research vineyards, collect data, come back in, and then teach you how to actually visualize it and use it. So those are the in-person meetings coming up. We are anticipating our Winter Grower Conference to be in person this year in March. We are sort of doing a hybrid this year. We're going to have a January and a February session that are all a part of the conference package, and then the in-person in March, providing that everything stays as it is now. But again, we do have to follow the regulations of the state. It is held at the State University at Fredonia. So if they say we can't, then we will just switch to the virtual instead of in person. But we are hoping for that.
Yeah, I think part of the reason we're doing the virtual sessions in January and February for the conferences, I think, you guys have all gotten used to that. So, it's a valuable resource so that we can stay in touch more frequently, but also if for some reason we do have to go virtual in March, we're not asking, for 8 hours of your time on a single day in front of a computer. It will allow us to get you the most important content virtually spaced out a little bit so that it's not quite so intensive. We've gotten a lot of feedback from growers and not just growers, I think professionals in extension get sort of Zoom exhaustion. So we're trying to avoid that. And hopefully it's just going to be in person anyway.
Right.
So next up, I think that pretty much covers it. Other than, coffee pot meetings next year, I anticipate that those will be in person. But of course, we can't say that with 100% certainty. So I assume since they are outside, and we have come a long way in the last year and a half that I expect to see everybody at coffee pot meetings next year. And hopefully I'm not wrong about that. The next question, I think I'm going to take sort of exclusively. A grower wants to know what percentage of farmers are 60 years old and above. It doesn't seem to him like there are a lot of young people involved in the industry. I think he's talking specifically about grapes. Our industry is usually, when it's measured, is usually 3 to 4 years older than typical agriculture. We have some market forces, cooperatives that make it a little bit harder to enter just because payments are a little more delayed than they would be in other agricultural crops. The fact that you're growing a perennial crop that's an asset doesn't help anything either. So that delays entry as well. So we are about 3 to 4 years older than most agricultural businesses. And farmers are old in general anyway. So very close to 50% of growers are above 60 years of age. Um, no, there are not a lot of young people taking over. They're there. They're typically involved in the larger organizations. We've lost about 50% of our growers since 2000. So in 21 years, that was based on the 2017 Census of Agriculture and the 2020 Census of Agriculture. So in 17 years, we lost half our growers. And if you really drill down into that, we've added a number of growers that are below 1 acre. So about 30% of an increase in that below 1 acre. So we've actually lost more like 65% of our growers, and there's a larger interest in very, very small plantings. If you're below an acre, maybe you're opening a winery. You're just getting started, but more than likely it's just a backyard grower that maybe harvests the fruit for themselves and their own use, and maybe makes a little wine in their basement. Most of our wineries do have an acre to 5 acres of grapes, somewhere in that category once they get established. So we have lost a lot of our growers, and I expect that trend will continue, but we have not lost very much acreage, despite the fact that we have a vineyard improvement program that provides financial incentives for removing concords. We've had buyback programs from National Grape to reduce the number of acreage that they were bringing in. Despite all that, we've only lost about 1,000 acres of grapes. So big farms are just going to continue to get larger. And that's, I think, what's going to get us through this. And there's a lot of interest in a few young growers on those big farms. And that's probably what the future is going to look like.
Kevin, what do you think? We're going to see more of those less than an acre ones because of COVID? Everyone's staying home? Or do you think because it's a perennial system, they probably didn't bother?
Well, there's two things there. This data comes from NASS. So I have no idea how they even got NASS surveys to answer. So it's, I don't know how they even got on the list, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, that's been a trend for a lot of years. I would imagine that actually it will go the other way. The Census of Ag is every 3 years, so you might see it go up one more time. But I think after that, you're going to see it go down. I think people lose interest in what's in their backyard or move on to something else. But maybe I'm wrong. I have no idea. I mean, that's business to consumer marketing, which is well outside my expertise because I don't understand how consumers behave, and I leave that to experts because it doesn't make sense to me. They do all sorts of crazy things that make no sense to me, and I've never studied it, so I will leave that to the experts. But I would imagine that you might see that increase in the next census just because of the timing of the census after COVID.
Right.
And then I would think decrease after that. But, the only reason I mention it is because when that census first came out, what jumped out at me is we lost half of our growers. And I didn't really notice that they added a category for under 1 acre. And that represents a substantial portion of the increase in growers. So we actually decreased on the commercial side more than that 50%, which I did not notice at first blush. So we will just get smaller, or we will just get larger, and that is the future. So I think succession planning should really anticipate how you are going to integrate your farm into somebody else's farm if you're a smaller grower.
I think mechanization also has to be in there as well.
I have no idea. Probably. I mean, it does not look like labor is going to become any easier. And obviously, if you own 200, 300, 400 acres of grapes, you're not going to be pruning them yourself. So the other question we had was, and I don't know if this is a concern. It doesn't really specify if it's a concern about scheduling or if it's a concern about ripening. I'm going to just guess that it's about ripening, but a grower hasn't picked any concords yet. I know this grower is sort of a medium sized grower, maybe a very small large grower, around 100 acres or less. Um, so you're looking at something close to 1,000 tons, and they haven't picked any Concords yet. So obviously that's a little bit concerning. But
Concerning, yeah.
yeah, that's something we've seen, maybe not as extreme as having not picked at all, but we've definitely seen some struggles with ripening. And Jen, I don't know if you want to sort of elaborate on that at all. Or Andy, maybe what you've seen in the Northeast area or Pennsylvania.
Well, we were talking earlier about this. I think there's a lot of factors at play here. So the Northeast area, you want to give the stats that we talked about earlier, how the Welch's Northeast plant is taken in, did you say 80% of its acre?
No, but it does seem like the processors and deliveries from Pennsylvania are further along than they are from New York, and I'm guessing probably certain areas in New York.
So I could attribute that because they got hit relatively hard with the frost freeze events.
Right.
So their crop load would be lighter than some other areas. So, and it just makes sense that if there's less fruit out there to ripen, it would ripen faster. They'd be able to bring it in. They're making the bricks. As far as what's going on and what I'm hearing from growers around the area, yes, some of them are not making bricks. Some of them, I think, are pushing their vines. And I'm not saying it's the right or wrong thing to do. We did say earlier on, and us here at Clairol actually pushed a portion of our research vines, and we're like hoping to get those last couple loads in. It's a gamble that we made, and no one anticipated the really wet and dreary July. And then every time not every time, okay, so that's a being a little bit dramatic there, but when people went to harvest and their bricks were borderline, I keep hearing that it was just raining, and they're worried about the dilution factor bringing their bricks down. I think that a lot of people who pushed their vines and were hoping to get that extra bit may have pushed them a bit too much, and now they're struggling to make sugars. Let me show you. We have done research here at Clairol. Dr. Terry Bates has done this for years and followed our phenology block. I'm going to share my screen. This is for people who are watching it on video blog. You may see this, and those of you out there in podcast land, I am showing a graph of pruning weights and yields, what you can push your crop, where you're overcropped, undercropped, and balanced. And it shows that if you have a 2-pound vine, your vines are going to be balanced. You can hang 8 tons per acre. This year, people are averaging, well, not averaging, and again, I'm just hearing from those who are reporting to me, I'm hearing a lot of the 12 tons per acre out there. And if you have a 2-pound vine at 12 tons per acre, you are severely overcropped and run the risk of not making sugars. You're overcropped at 10 at a 2-pound vine. So I'm thinking that people were hoping for a bright and sunny and dry September, August, July, and that just didn't happen for us.
Right. Yeah, I mean, looking at from what I've seen in vineyards, and I think everybody's reported this, is that crop sizes are larger than people expected at 30 days post bloom. And from what I can tell, growers who did really good crop estimates, some of them were off by around 2 ton to the acre. So they thought they were going to get 10 and they're at 12, which I would attribute to, July rain and larger berries than expected. And now we've got the September rain. So there really hasn't been at least what I've seen, a lot of dehydration yet. And it's already October 20th and we're still not seeing dehydration. So typically one might count on that as sort of an insurance policy for, well, if I overdo it, at least they'll dehydrate and I'll get something in. That hasn't happened yet. But what I would also say is growers who, lift up the canopy and just guess, and maybe this isn't, the grower that asked the question, but there are definitely growers out there, because I've seen the crop estimates, that thought they had 7 and they have 14. And, I think that their decision to thin or to not thin probably or should have been better informed by a good crop estimate. And there were some flaws in crop estimation this year in that crop estimation is limited by, what we know about berry size, and berry size is a little bit unpredictable. So that 2 tons, that's sort of the as big of an error as we could ever probably expect to get. Um, and that's unfortunate. And I think growers who did a good crop estimation that decided to push the limit have struggled a little bit. But growers who were very surprised by some very large crops, there's a whole lot of, I think, confounding problems that are created by that. Um,
Right.
I've talked to growers that, are barely meeting brick standards, but they cannot get extra loads because, they told a processor that they had 500 tons when they have 1,000. So, or, they have 1,000 tons or they said they had 1,000 and they have 2,000. So that's going to impact the yield that you get paid for, even if you meet bricks. So there's a whole sort of host of problems there. And that could also be what's impacting some of these medium to small growers is, if they hire somebody to harvest, that harvester or trucker is at the mercy of the total number of estimates that were turned in on their behalf by the growers. So, if a gigantic trucking firm needs to haul 5 or 10,000 tons of grapes, and the estimates were 3,000, then they have to receive a lot of extra loads from, a facility that is not necessarily overwhelmed by the yields that are coming in, but this is what they were built for. They weren't built to take in any more than they're taking in this year. This is a big year in terms of yield. So, everybody's who does have bricks, they're fighting for extra loads and they're difficult to get, depending on the processor.
What about the cash market for those loads that don't make it in? Is it saturated? Is it available? Have you heard anything?
I have not officially heard that it's completely saturated. Um, One big area would have been Constellation, Gallo, and they're closed, so they're definitely saturated.
Right.
So that's one buyer that's off the table. Um, and they did exhaust their storage capacity and took significantly more Concords than they anticipated. So they were full and they took well over what they were contracted to take. I would imagine, when you look at other processors in the context of the size of the crop, that if storage hasn't run out yet, it will fairly soon. You look at the next biggest one, it would be Refresco, and they certainly haven't run out of storage yet because they're certainly still taking what they're contracted to take. But they do have a minimum brick standard as well. So, if you get rejected from one plant and you go there, you may not find any better luck. So
I have one more question for that and then we can move on, and I'm sorry, but what about like the Finger Lakes Classified? Is it a commercial juice grape to sell to wineries to look out, see if anybody needs anything? Because it is a wine grape.
no,
No, don't use the classifieds. Nobody's looking for Concord.
no, I mean, I think when we think about our audience, it's like you might be able to move a ton or two out of your 2,000 tons on the
Right,
class.
right.
And in a year like this, I wouldn't anticipate that you could move any at all. I don't think I think those wineries are getting what they want, and most of them actually don't process Concords because the larger processors essentially provide processing and storage for a lower cost than they can do it themselves. So they buy it from the processors because if they tried to buy Concord right now, it would be at the expense of something else they could put in a tank that
Got it.
is more valuable.
Good luck with that. And I'm hoping those people who haven't harvested sees wood maturity, because I'm a little bit nervous about that too with some of these heavier crops.
Well, before we leave the overcropping, I just like to add that, our growers commonly, push the limits. I mean, that's just the nature of the juice grape business. I mean, they make their money on yield. So, growers take that risk, and it is a risk. And this season definitely shows that it's a risk. I mean, a lot of times it's, oh, the weather's going to be bad maybe during the season or at, during harvest. Well, this was a pretty decent season as far as, heat units, degree days, but we did get a lot of rain. And so, and like Kevin mentioned, that also added to, the extra tonnage, because I've heard from a lot of growers, and Kevin and Jen, you have too, that these berries are really big. I mean, I've heard that, a lot, that these growers are surprised how big they are. So that's the added weight. But the other thing I think that this shows is that, and Kevin, you mentioned this, you can't just, pick up the canopy, look underneath and say, oh, I think I have. This really shows that you have to crop estimate. And even this year, when our guys did crop estimate and did a good job, there's that factor of the bigger berries. Right. So there's always that risk factor. And you never can tell the season what it's going to be. So if you push it, you got to push it to maybe just above where you think your vines are going to handle, not this huge overcropping.
That's a good point, Andy. And I'm sorry, did you want to finish? Because I talked to Terry about this yesterday.
And I was going to say, you might be able to get by with, right at the limit or slightly higher if the season is right to ripen that and get it in. But when you're way above that, I don't care what the weather is, your vines are not going to be able to ripen that if you're way overcrop. And so again, like Kevin says, that's a risk you have to take. And this season is a good example of, even if the season is decent, there's factors that always enter into it that you can't compensate for.
So I agree with you 100%. And I know that there are some growers out there, and I appreciate this tactic, who are like, we do want to push the vines. So they left about maybe 15 to 20% of their acreage where they really pushed it, and they thinned the others, and everybody knows where you get sugars. So I like that people were sort of playing that. I appreciate the competition of it. So I kind of like that gamble, but they didn't gamble the whole farm. They just did a small section that they thought, all right, I'm really going to try to push these vines this year.
So I think it's important to remember, and this is what I kind of urge growers to do, is like Andy was saying, is just to try to do your best to estimate your crop. So at least you know what kind of risk you're taking, and you can be as confident as you can be in that level of risk. Right. And I think the other thing that I see reluctance in is to acknowledge that, depending on your market, but for almost any market, and other than, say, a Gallo type market that's really not interested in bricks in the traditional sense, although they have some interest in ripening, it's just a different kind of interest. So other than a place like Gallo, I think you want 25% of your acreage to be balanced, because even if your revenue is a little bit lower, it allows for logistical ease at harvest. When we talk about what's overcropped and what gets ripe and what doesn't, a grower technically does not need to ripen a crop to deliver a crop. They deliver unripe grapes all the time, what we would call unripe. That's fine. But to try to reach what most processors require as a minimum standard, or require to obtain, favorable scheduling or extra loads, 25% of your crop, it really does make sense for it to be very close to balanced. And it's really easy to say some of this stuff now, but it's also, I think, important to remember that at 30 days post bloom, this was not an okay year in terms of weather. It was an excellent year.
Right.
The only reason it's okay now is because there were periods where it was pretty crummy since then. And that's sort of why we are where we are. And it's just, I think, a good reminder that can happen, that what happens in June is not weather that predicts what happens in September or July. Um, I like to view weather as an independent variable, and other people don't. But that's how I plan my risk management strategy. Is just because it was sunny yesterday doesn't mean it's going to be sunny tomorrow.
And just to add to that, what we educate people on here at Cornell University and what the research backs up is the balanced vine. If you want that return crop the next year and not have that roller coaster, high crop, low crop, high crop, balance your vines. You know what you're getting year in and year out. We never tell you to go ahead, overcrop your vines and hope that happens for you. But I agree, 25% at least should be balanced. But
Right.
I
So
prefer to see more
right.
80.
So we say that 100% of your vines should be in balance, but when we say that, we don't mean that you won't be able to harvest your crop if it's not in balance. And if it's slightly overcropped, you may not. You may have a smaller crop the following year, but it may still be large enough. But you need to know whether it's slightly overcropped or extremely overcropped. And when we have, when it's easy to make an error on crop estimation by 100%, you don't have that information to make that decision. I think we've belabored the point. I think part of the struggle now is it's far too late to do anything, and it's a really painful lesson to learn if, in fact, some of these grapes don't make it into the plant. I mean, from a financial perspective, it's a real disaster. And I think that's why we talk so much about this stuff, is because we try really hard to prevent, things like this from happening. And we know that growers are not at all risk adverse. And that's probably why most of the time they are successful. But, you know, taking on too much risk sometimes feels like, you took one step forward and then you take three steps back when it really is a true disaster. But we're not there yet. I mean, it is October 20th. There's really not a lot of time left for harvest. And I'm assuming, Jen, that you've seen ripening slow way down. Anecdotally, that's what I've heard.
It has slowed right down. It's sort of leveled off. However, we've had some nice days these last couple days, hoping for a little bit of dehydration. So fingers crossed. I'm the, ultimate optimist here. So I'm rooting for all of you to get that done. I really don't want to see disaster.
Well, I mean, I again, it goes back to, I'm not going to predict the weather. We should probably have a frost soon, but you look at colder areas around us and across the US, and things are just warm right now. So if that holds on for 10 or 15 more days or even longer, it may not help these vines that have leaves that, they're not gone, but they're not active anymore. It's not going to help them ripen. But, for growers that are planning on just continuing to harvest stuff that just barely meets standards, and it's going to take a long time and they can't do it in the rain, I think best case scenario, the good news is we might have some time to do it.
I'm actually going to put in a plug here for our viticulture planning calendar, because if you are finding yourself in that predicament where maybe you lifted up the canopy and did your crop estimation that way, we give that information to you. We're available to help you figure out how to do that. And that's where I want you to record your bloom dates. Use that, take that, keep all of your records so you know when 30 days is. Or if you even do it later than 30 days, you know where you fall on the chart that we give you because you know your bloom date. And also in our viticulture planning calendar, we have scouting, when you should scout for things. So I think that's a great segue right into what I would like Andy to talk about.
And I'm assuming you want me to talk about spotted lanternfly.
Yes, sir.
Well, we, among the team, Jen, Kevin, and I, we thought it would be at least a good time to bring up spotted lanternfly. It's harvest time. This is the time that there's adults flying around, not in our area yet, but they're laying eggs. And we wanted to remind growers and personnel at ag-related businesses that especially if you're getting in equipment or supplies, these ag dealers, whether it's a equipment dealer or ag chemical dealers, if you're getting in anything from especially the quarantined areas, really be careful and inspect anything that's coming in for adults or maybe eggs. Also at this time, we've got wineries up here, both in the Lake Erie region, that ship juice to areas down in the southeast. I mean, they ship juice to the Midwest, to the South, and some of those areas are quarantined areas. So, you have to be careful because you're sending that down from this area, but then you're taking your equipment back, and you have to really be sure that even before you leave that area, that you inspect your equipment, whether it's the semis, the tanks that are coming back for adults or even egg masses. And then when you get back, do the same thing and make sure that you clean that equipment off. And I think it's safer to assume that there's a possibility that there could have been some hitchhikers on there, and to clean that equipment thoroughly and inspect it both before and after you get back to this area. The other thing we have to worry about is this is a time of season where fishermen are going to be coming up from different areas that may have spotted lanternfly, and these fishermen are coming up for steelhead fishing. And with spotted lanternfly being really good hitchhikers or laying eggs on just about anything, we have to also be aware of that. So even the general public, to check your vehicles before you come up if you're coming in areas that have spotted lanternfly. And also then finally, I'll end with our great growers themselves. You guys should be out there scouting throughout the season, but especially now for adults, or in the winter, spring, for egg masses. I mean, they'll lay eggs on anything. And if you're getting posts, say, from other areas, inspect those posts before you get them out into the vineyard, and just keep an eye on, really be diligent about scouting, because it really isn't a matter of if we're going to get these. Unfortunately, it's a matter of when. And so the earlier we can detect these, the presence of spotted lanternfly, the more vital it is going to be for management. So I don't know, Jen, if you also have, you put up the reporting, if you're watching the video, for where they can report, growers in Pennsylvania or New York. If you do suspect that you have spotted lanternfly, you could take some pictures. We want you to take pictures, collect a sample. If it's eggs, if you think it's an egg mass, take pictures, scrape the egg mass off into alcohol, or even if you only have hand sanitizer, record the location where you found that, the address, or if you have GPS coordinates, and then immediately report it.
Yeah, and thank you, Andy. I just wanted to say, because sometimes we just go through what people have to do, but we need to know where you found it. And that's not just us, but that's where PDA or Ag and Markets are going to send somebody out and actually survey the area. So if like it was on this post, that's helpful to us, or I found it on a tree in my friend's backyard and this is the address, then we have to do, not us, but the PDA or Ag and Markets comes out and does a search of the entire area to look for more egg masses, look for more adults. And now is the time, until it freezes, right, Andy, that we'll see adults and they'll be laying egg masses.
Yes. And the other thing, first you have to report it, if it's in Pennsylvania, to PDA, if it's in New York, to New York Department of Ag and Markets, or DEC. But we also would like you to contact anyone on the grape extension team, either Jen or Kevin or I, because we would also like to know. We can come out and also take a look. We're not going to do the inspection like PDA or DEC, New York DEC would do, but at least we're aware of it, and we can tell you, yes, that is or isn't. Um, you know, we've been getting reports of already from grape growers and homeowners about different, they suspect different either egg masses that they found or insects. And all of us have gotten that, Kevin and Jen and I, and we're more than happy to make sure that it's not a spotted lanternfly. And if it is, like I said, we definitely have to get it reported to the Department of Agriculture's in New York or PA, wherever you find it.
And we have what the New York State IPM website, the DEC website, the PDA. Do these PDA have a separate website? There are images, just Google spotted lanternfly. There are images of it all over if you have not seen what it looks like, or our website has it.
And there's also a lot of resources, both from Penn State, Cornell, and the Department of Agriculture in Pennsylvania, and the DEC in New York. So there's a lot of different resources. I don't know if you have those, Jen, that you could put up.
Your resources, I do.
Yes, if you could put those up, and you could go to those websites, and any of them have just a wealth of information on how to identify them, what the different stages look like, how to report it. So there's a lot of information out there. So, you really should be up on this, because it's going to be here and we got to be ready for it.
Agreed. Just to sort of reiterate, Andy actually did this in a crop update as well. It was October 7th, I think, Andy. Yes. So the last crop update that the Lake Erie Regional Grape Program published, all of this information is in there as well.
Yeah, I think, the only other thing I would add is, as we look for it, probably by 2023, you should be planning on how to manage it as part of your business plan. And the only reason I say that is because there are a number of growers that are not equipped to target an insect like this the time it needs to be targeted. It's not part of what we do. So I think that's part of getting ready for this. This is not like, when Abound started failing in powdery mildew, we just moved on. And, we had other tools, we just weren't using them. So having the available labor and equipment to spray during harvest is going to be an adjustment that at the very least one should be thinking about it. I'm not saying go out and buy a sprayer today, because I could certainly be off by a year or two, and I hope I am. I hope it's 2025. But thinking about what your plan is and what you will need, so that we may be lucky enough to have some notice. We may see instars in the summer at levels where we can start to confidently say, this year is the year, and you may have a few months to prepare for it. But at the very least, I think you want to know how you're going to prepare and what your available labor is going to look like to handle it. But that's about it. I want to thank you all for joining us. Unless there's something else that one of you wants to add before we go, I will send out another text message later this week, because I appreciate the feedback we got, and I do really like addressing some of the questions and comments from growers, and hopefully we get some more of those. And I did hear from one grower. They noticed that we were not here last week. Part of that's my fault. I tried my best, but we really could not get any material together in time because of some other things that were going on at Penn State and Cornell. So hopefully that won't happen again. We are, I think, right around episode 30, 32, and we've had a couple of weeks where we've done 2 episodes a week. So we're about 40 episodes in at this point, and that was the first time we missed a week. So that's good, and hopefully we don't, make that a regular thing, but at least during harvest, because we are, as I've said, and I am trying to stick to this, we are trying to get you content when you are driving around in circles. So that's our goal, and we'll keep trying to do that for the next couple of weeks. So thanks a lot for joining us, and please feel free to respond to that text message or reach out to us if you want to sign up for those text messages and give us some more feedback so we have more things to talk about. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next week.
Happy harvest.